was 30 years old and sitting in a law office that looked like it had been designed to drain the color out of human beings. Everything was beige: walls, carpet, furniture. Even the damn coffee mug on the table in front of me was beige, as if someone had taken the idea of neutrality and scrubbed it free of any emotion. Across from me sat a man in a navy suit, fingers steepled, eyes glazed with the boredom of someone who had watched 1,000 marriages die and didn't care for the eulogy. "Sign here," he said, pushing a thick sheaf of papers toward me with one hand while glancing at his phone with the other. He didn't even pretend to be interested in the details. "Your wife gets everything." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so completely absurd. "Everything?" I repeated, the word catching on my tongue like a piece of glass. The man didn't blink. I looked down at the line where my name was supposed to go. It was already typed out in perfect serif font. Grayson Camden. The name I'd built a life around. A life that was being disassembled, line by line, bullet point by bullet point, into something unrecognizable. She stood behind her attorney, arms folded like a queen watching a peasant trial, her expression a porcelain mask of victory. Delilah. Her name had once meant something beautiful to me, like a symphony, like trust. We'd been married almost a decade. I'd met her in college. She was laughter and ambition, clever eyes and perfect timing. We used to sit up late dreaming about homes, travel, building a future together. I worked night shifts to help her through law school. She said she'd never forget that. Apparently, she had. Her lawyer, a man named Caldwell who used to mow his lawn shirtless while chatting with us over the fence, now had a trimmed beard and a $1,000 briefcase. That briefcase might as well have been packed with daggers, each document a cut meant to bleed me out. I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing my house, my car, my savings account, and, yes, even our golden retriever Max, whose leash I'd picked out with more excitement than my last birthday. "Is this even legal?" I asked, still not touching the pen. Not because I thought I had a real chance, but because some part of me still believed in decency. That part was stupid. "Your refusal to manage joint finances responsibly has been well documented," Caldwell said smoothly, his voice soaked in smug certainty. "Combined with the testimony from Mr. Marco Ruiz and the sworn statements regarding your emotional instability." Testimony. I cut in. "Marco? My best friend." Delilah didn't even flinch. She just adjusted a pearl earring and examined her manicure, the soft pink curve of her nails catching the sunlight like they had better things to do than destroy someone. Her eyes flicked up for just a second, met mine, and I saw it there, satisfaction. She wasn't just winning. She was savoring it. Marco. God. Of course. The signs were there, in hindsight. The sudden distance, the weekend absences, the way she laughed too hard at his jokes and stopped correcting people when they mistook them for a couple. I thought I was being paranoid. I gave them the benefit of the doubt because I believed trust was a choice. Because I loved her. Because I didn't want to become one of those bitter men who checked her phone or tracked her location. I was better than that. I was stupid. The lawyer sighed, impatient now. "Mr. Camden, if you'd like to dispute the terms, we can schedule a hearing, though I should warn you, Delilah's uncle is the presiding judge." That was the killing blow, delivered with a casual shrug, like it wasn't the most corrupt sentence I'd ever heard. I turned to Delilah again, willing her to show even a sliver of the girl I once knew. Nothing. Just that cool, glassy smirk that told me I'd been used up, squeezed dry, and now discarded like yesterday's news. I stared at the papers. Paragraphs of legal jargon. Numbers and asset allocations. "No alimony," I murmured, running my finger down the lines. "No equity from the house. She gets the business account?" "You forfeited your claim when you removed yourself from active management 3 years ago," Caldwell said. "By mutual agreement, if you recall. Because she asked me to. Because she said I needed balance. Because she cried when I said I'd keep working weekends. I gave it up because I thought love was worth that. She took it and built her firm from it. Our firm." My throat felt like sandpaper. I wanted to fight, to scream. But what good would it do? The courtroom was rigged. My allies were traitors. My dignity was on life support. "She keeps Max?" I asked softly, not even able to say the dog's name without my chest tightening. "Pets are considered shared property, but since Delilah is remaining in the marital residence." "Right," I whispered. "Of course." The pen was cheap. Plastic. The kind you'd throw in a drawer and never miss. But in that moment, it weighed as much as a gavel. My fingers hovered. I could walk out. Refuse. Drag this through appeals. Expose everything. But that would cost more than I had. And she knew it. They all knew it. I signed. Caldwell leaned forward and took the document like it was a receipt, not the cremation of my life. He checked it, nodded, and said, "We'll file immediately. You'll receive a copy once the court finalizes the dissolution." Delilah gave a polite smile, turned, and walked out without a word. No goodbye. No thank you. No regret. I sat there alone in that beige office, being still wet on the paper in front of me, feeling like a man who had just buried himself. The silence screamed louder than any argument ever could. And just like that, I was nothing. The backseat of a 2008 silver Honda Accord wasn't meant for sleep. Not really. The upholstery was stiff, the middle hump jabbed into my spine, and the faint scent of old takeout clung to the ceiling like it had made a permanent home there. But for the past week, it was all I had. My new address was the back row of a parking lot behind a 24-hour gym just off Highway 10, wedged between a busted vending machine and a dented garbage bin. I kept a sunshade across the windshield and a blanket balled up on the seat beside me. Not for warmth, mostly for illusion. To make it look like I still had some semblance of control. I'd gone from a king-sized bed with goose-down pillows to curling my knees to my chest so my feet didn't knock against the driver's seat. From brushed concrete floors and glass countertops to a dashboard held together with duct tape and prayer. And I would have taken it with some dignity if it weren't for the silence that settled in every night. That silence was louder than anything. Louder than Delilah's betrayal. Louder than Marco's lies. Louder than the court that pretended justice was blind when it was clearly wearing her uncle's spectacles. They'd frozen our joint bank accounts a week before she filed, drained them without blinking. When I asked for an explanation, when I still believed there was one, Delilah called it preventative protection. Her lawyer called it responsible fiscal separation. I called it theft, but none of that mattered. The judge ruled in her favor before I even had time to speak. Apparently, I was unfit to manage assets, a line pulled straight from Marco's statement. Marco, my best friend since college. We used to crash on each other's couches during finals. He'd helped me pick out the ring I gave Delilah. I'd been the best man at his first wedding. But when she needed a knife, he handed it to her, handle first, blade waiting for my back. I didn't even know they'd been sleeping together until I saw the photo. Posted 2 days after the court hearing. Delilah, champagne in hand, Marco's arm snug around her waist. I zoomed in on her ring finger. No band. Just a new bracelet I hadn't paid for. Caption, starting fresh with someone who sees me. I saw it while sitting in a diner booth, using the last bar of free Wi-Fi before my battery died. I didn't eat. Just stared. My bank cards had all declined by then. She'd filed fraud claims against charges I made the month before, said I'd been irresponsibly using marital funds. The bank flagged my name. I couldn't access $1. Even Max's vet bills were now under her name, which is how I found out she'd relocated him to her sister's home. I called. No one answered. The first night in the car was denial. The second was rage. By the third, I was just trying to survive. I parked outside the gym because they didn't tow unless you caused trouble. I signed up for a week-long free trial with a fake name, Chad Williams, so I could use the showers in the early mornings. I'd roll out of the back seat at 5 a.m., neck aching, try to brush my teeth without making eye contact with anyone. I kept an old duffel bag in the trunk with 2 shirts, a pair of slacks, and a box of protein bars I'd picked up with the last cash I had. That and my laptop. The laptop. That was the only thing Delilah hadn't managed to touch. She didn't know I kept it in a locker at my old co-working space. It was a 5-year-old Lenovo with a cracked corner and fading keys, but it booted, and that was enough. I'd spend afternoons hopping from coffee shop to library to mall food court, hunting Wi-Fi and open outlets. No home, no job, but a browser full of job listings and YouTube tutorials. It started with coding videos. I'd messed with web design back in school, built some HTML pages for friends, but I never went deep. Now I had time. Now I had motivation. My fingers were slow at first, hesitant, but soon they remembered the rhythm. Syntax, logic, function. It became therapy. Some guys drink. Some guys disappear into strip clubs or casinos. I taught myself cybersecurity. It was almost poetic, learning how to defend against theft, against manipulation, against breach. Because I'd lived it. I'd been breached. I'd been gutted. Now I wanted the armor. I wanted the weapons. I wanted a skill that could never be taken from me, no matter how many signatures I put on a page. I found forums where anonymous posters shared stories like mine. Men who lost everything in courtrooms that didn't see them. Women whose partners erased their credit while smiling at brunch. People who rebuilt with nothing but time, drive, and Wi-Fi. One guy, code named Jules, posted a thread about encrypting personal files to keep ex-partners from accessing shared drives. I messaged him. We started talking. He had a scarred past too. Literal burns. Said he used to sleep under bridges before building his first app. He sent me code to study. I sent him algorithms I'd written. We exchanged numbers. It wasn't a friendship yet, just a thread of connection. But it was more real than anything I had left in my old life. At night, I'd sit in the car, hoodie pulled tight, watching headlights blur across the wet pavement. I'd whisper Max's name just to feel like I wasn't completely alone. I missed the sound of his paws on the hardwood, the way he used to nudge my elbow when he wanted to go out. Delilah used to say he loved me more than her. She wasn't wrong. One morning, I looked at myself in the gym mirror after showering. Pale, hollow-eyed, jaw tighter than I remembered. But there was something else too. Something simmering. Not rage. Not grief. A kind of clarity. I'd already died in that office when I signed those papers. This version of me? The one standing barefoot in a borrowed towel, building a new skill out of spite and hunger? This was resurrection. I was 31 when I stepped into the offices of Virion Chain Works with a resume full of smoke and mirrors. I'd made up job titles, padded experience, and listed a fake startup that didn't even have a website, just a shell logo I designed in a mall food court. I wore a blazer 2 sizes too big, and my dress shoes still squeaked with sweat from walking 15 blocks in them. The receptionist smiled like she knew I didn't belong, but I smiled right back. Confidence is a mask that works best when you're desperate. And I was starving. The guy who interviewed me looked 12. A baby-faced CTO named Travis who said, like, every third word and had a man bun he kept adjusting like it was a dial for his intelligence. He asked a few questions I barely answered, just enough to sound fluent in code, just enough to make my GitHub profile look active. Then he said the words I needed. We're hiring junior engineers. Pay's not great. You game. I nodded before he finished the sentence. I was hired the next day. Virion was a second-tier crypto firm, trying to disrupt the digital wallet space, but drowning in bad code and worse leadership. Half the team was remote. The other half was glued to energy drinks and Reddit threads. The building smelled like burnt coffee and nerves. But it was a paycheck. Barely. $22 an hour. Enough to move out of the car and into a shared apartment with a guy named Ellis who only spoke in sports metaphors and didn't believe in plates. We ate off paper towels, but I had a mattress again, a doorknob, a socket to charge my laptop without feeling like I was stealing. I woke at 6 every morning, hit the gym, made instant oatmeal, and then locked in at the desk by 8. The company's code base was a disaster, sloppy, unprotected, full of logic gaps and duplicated functions. At first, I just fixed what was asked. Quietly. I didn't want to draw attention. I was the new guy, the cheap labor. But I started staying late. Refactoring backend systems. Leaving notes in the repo no one asked for. Fixing bugs that weren't mine. My fingers learned the architecture like a second language, like the kind of fluency born from necessity. I wasn't brilliant. I was obsessed. They noticed. Not in the way you'd hope. 6 months in, Travis called me into the break room. He had a protein shake in one hand and a guilt-ridden smile plastered across his face. Look, man, he said, not meeting my eyes. We're pivoting direction. Cutting some roles. Nothing personal. I asked him how many others were being let go. He hesitated. Just, you. The words hit harder than they should have. But I didn't flinch. Didn't ask why. Didn't try to defend the hours I'd poured into their system. The loyalty I'd forged in silence. None of it mattered. I was cheap and now replaceable. I thanked him. I actually thanked him. Because while the job was gone, the knowledge wasn't. And something had shifted in me. I no longer wanted to fit into someone else's system. I wanted to build one. I emptied what little savings I had into a prepaid card, bought server space, a new domain, and 3 ebooks on security architecture. I shut myself in my room for days, the hum of Ellis watching football in the background, and built. I coded like a man possessed. Not for a product. For a mission. You see, it wasn't just about security. It was about protection. No one protects men like me, people who get wiped out in courtrooms that speak the language of power and nepotism. No one shields individuals from the weaponized blend of litigation, manipulation, and digital exposure. I wanted to build a wall for people like me. A fortress. One that couldn't be penetrated by a jealous ex or a rigged courtroom or a charming thief who used to call you brother. And that's when I reconnected with Jules. We'd kept in touch lightly after our coding forum days, but this time I sent him a working demo. It was crude, ugly, honestly, but the concept was strong. A tool that tracked financial vulnerabilities, account anomalies, and asset risk across a personal digital footprint. It sounded paranoid. That's because it was. But Jules didn't laugh. He sent back revisions in under 12 hours. Within 3 weeks, we were coding together daily. He lived in a studio in Cincinnati, surviving off disability checks and freelance encryption gigs. His story was darker than mine. Childhood trauma. A hospital fire. But his mind was extraordinary, sharp like broken glass, and just as dangerous when honed. We worked through nights, through meals, through breakdowns. I'd wake to his code commits at 3 a.m., full of annotations and dark humor. If this line breaks, we're all doomed. LOL. We called it Blackwell Systems. The idea was simple. No one should be defenseless in the digital age. Our software encrypted emails, cloaked IPs, monitored dark web leaks, and offered immediate asset relocation tools. People who had been ghosted, robbed, blackmailed, framed. These were our clients. Our users weren't corporations. They were the collateral damage of messy marriages, broken trust, and corporate betrayal. We made $200 our first month, then $900. By month 4, a lawyer from Texas emailed us asking if we could shield a celebrity client's communications during a contentious divorce. Jules said yes before I could even blink. Our first major contract paid us $30,000. I stared at the wire transfer like it was a hallucination. Ellis came home that day to find me lying on the kitchen floor, just breathing. Blackwell wasn't a company yet. Not officially. We hadn't filed papers, hadn't rented an office, hadn't even picked a logo. But I'd never felt more sure about anything in my life. This was the thing. The line between the man I had been and the one I was becoming. Born from betrayal. Powered by paranoia. Built on a broken code base of pain. This wasn't revenge. It was resurrection in source code. And we were just getting started. By the time I turned 36, Blackwell wasn't just software, it was an institution. We had offices in New York, London, and Dubai, but even those were mostly symbolic. Our real infrastructure lived in shadows, off-grid data vaults, encrypted remote nodes, and virtual networks that left no trace. Jules and I had become ghosts, visible only when we wanted to be. We were the people you called when the bank froze your assets under false pretenses, when your ex-lover leaked your financials to the press, when your enemy made your inbox a war zone. We didn't just create firewalls. We built fortresses, steel and silence woven into every line of code. The irony? Delilah had no idea. Not until the Forbes article. They'd reached out through Sasha, my assistant, my firewall, and the only person besides Jules I trusted to speak on my behalf. They want to do a feature on the youngest CEOs in cybersecurity, she said one morning, her voice clipped, professional. You're ranked number 6. I didn't react. Not right away. Just stared at the email, the subject line glowing like a dare. Forbes 40 under 40 feature inquiry, Grayson Camden. I hadn't seen my full name in that font since my divorce papers. I agreed to the interview, reluctantly. No FaceTime. Just email responses. No photos from before 2020. They respected it, mostly because they didn't have a choice. We'd made Blackwell too valuable to ignore. Our name was on government contracts, tied to 6-figure retainer deals, whispered in courtrooms, passed like legend among the elite. Celebrities used us to cover affairs. CEOs used us to obscure acquisitions. Politicians used us to vanish the kind of emails that ruin careers. I didn't care about their sins. I only cared that we got paid to protect them. The article dropped on a Tuesday. Title: Grayson Camden, the silent architect of digital security. There was a photo, one Sasha picked. Me in a charcoal suit, standing in front of our Manhattan office with the skyline behind me. No smile, no warmth. Just eyes that had already seen the worst and built something in its wake. I didn't read the article, but Delilah did. I know because 3 days later, I got a notification that someone had searched my name at the courthouse where she once stole my life. That wasn't a coincidence. I could feel the tremor in the fabric. Like the past had finally looked up and realized I'd survived. My silence had protected me all these years. No interviews. No speaking engagements. Jules and I agreed early on we didn't need fame. We needed distance. I didn't want my name attached to press releases or podcast features. I wanted to operate in the shadows and control, untouchable. But now I'd been seen. And once people see you, they remember what they did to you. Especially when they realize you're not dead. When the article hit, Jules texted me. So, should we be worried about the ghost waking up? I replied, let them come. Because by then, we had systems in place. Layers of legal shields. Shell companies. Asset separation protocols. No one, not even Sasha, knew the full layout. If Delilah tried to sue, she'd find nothing. If she tried to shame me, she'd lose in the court of public opinion. I had something better than revenge. I had proof. Proof that I'd risen. Proof that the man she erased had rebuilt himself from shredded pay stubs and cold shower stalls. And not just into something livable, but into something unstoppable. I didn't smile for that photo because there was nothing left to smile about. I hadn't created a happy ending. I hadn't found closure or peace or whatever the self-help books said came after betrayal. What I'd found was purpose. Cold. Precise. Purpose. I didn't build Blackwell to make the world better. I built it to protect people like me, people who loved wrong and paid for it with everything. I built it to be the armor I never had. Delilah used to say I was too soft. That my problem was I expected fairness from a world that rewarded power. She used to say it like a joke, her voice low, her wine glass always half full, as if cynicism was sophistication. But power had never interested me until I had none. Until she took it. Until Marco twisted the knife and the courtroom clapped politely while I bled. Now I understood it. Power wasn't just about money. It was about insulation. Choice. Silence. Blackwell made me untouchable. But it didn't make me forget. That's why I kept the court transcript in my safe. That's why I still had Marco's text messages backed up in triplicate. That's why I kept a drive labeled, in case of cowards. It wasn't about using it. It was about knowing I could. Sometimes Sasha would ask if I ever wanted to take a break. Vacation, maybe. Go to the Maldives or rent a cabin in Switzerland. I told her no every time. Because I knew what stillness felt like when you had nothing. I wasn't ready to stop moving. Not yet. The real shift happened 2 months after the article. We landed a deal with a high-profile international law firm, Fletcher & Grange. Their clients were notoriously messy, and they needed end-to-end asset protection. The contract was worth $8 million annually. They called us essential. I called it inevitable. Jules flew in for the signing. It was the first time we met in person. He wore a turtleneck to hide some of his scars. I didn't ask. He didn't offer. But we shook hands like people who had built an empire out of ashes and coffee grounds. Later that night, we stood on the rooftop of our Manhattan office, watching the city buzz beneath us like a hive with no queen. Ever think it would go this far? He asked. No, I said. But I never thought she'd destroy me either. He nodded, thoughtful. What are you going to do if they come knocking? I didn't have to ask who he meant. I'll let them in, I said. And I'll be ready. Because the truth was, Blackwell wasn't just a company. It was a warning. A quiet, unspoken message to anyone who thought ruin was the end. It wasn't. It was the blueprint. Delilah always thought she'd land on her feet. That was her gift, confidence masquerading as inevitability. She wore it like perfume, strong enough to convince the room before she even spoke. Back then, I believed it too. She had a way of making you think the world would bend if she smiled wide enough. But charm doesn't pay debt. And confidence doesn't cut checks. By the time she turned 35, the shine had worn off. Her pearls got swapped for costume pieces. Her curated Instagram posts turned sporadic, filtered too heavily, like she was blurring out the reality beneath the gloss. From the outside, she was still the woman who won the divorce, who bled her husband dry and walked away with the dog and the dream house. But I had eyes in more places than she realized. Her boutique, the second one, went bankrupt 2 weeks before Christmas. The first had collapsed under unpaid rent and supplier lawsuits. She blamed the economy. She blamed toxic staff. Never herself. Never the reality that she didn't understand business. She understood aesthetics. The illusion of success. The applause that came with a ribbon cutting, not the months of quiet, grinding sacrifice required to keep the doors open. Her second husband, Barrett, was worse than I imagined. A gambler. Flashy teeth, fake tan, the kind of man who always had a big thing coming but never actually arrived with anything more than empty promises. I watched them from a distance. I wasn't stalking her. I was studying her. Because when people build their lives on illusion, eventually the cracks show. And Delilah's life? It was a cathedral of cards, stacked on shaky promises and trust funds that had dried up faster than she anticipated. Her father's company, the pride of the Hartwell name, was once a logistics titan. Founded by her grandfather, expanded by her father Russell, the firm had cornered the luxury supply chain market for nearly 2 decades. But Russell never adapted. He scoffed at tech, at automation, at the changing world. He kept old friends on the payroll, ignored shifting margins, leveraged everything for appearances. I knew, because I was once slated to inherit part of it. Back when I was the son-in-law. Back when I mattered. But Delilah's marriage to me had complicated things. Her father made it clear I was never their kind. The kind who inherited. The kind who wore money like skin. So he boxed me out. And when the divorce finalized, he assumed he'd erased me completely. He was wrong. Over the years, I kept quiet tabs on their books. Not illegally, just information that lived in public spaces, waiting for someone who knew how to read between the numbers. I saw the borrowing increase. The interest balloon. The real estate investments that were nothing but lost leaders dressed up in copper fixtures and rooftop lounges no one visited. I watched as the company cannibalized itself to fund image. And then, as expected, the banks came knocking. At first, they tried to bluff, refinance, beg, shift assets around like hiding cash under floorboards in a burning house. But you can only move liabilities around for so long before the weight of your bad decisions crushes the floor entirely. The first time my name showed up on their radar again was during a failed funding round. They were pitching investors for a cash injection, $30 million, to cover debt and modernize infrastructure. The pitch deck listed strategic partnerships, and one of the junior analysts dropped my name as a hypothetical contact in the cybersecurity space. Just a whisper. Just a bullet point in the appendix. Someone laughed in the meeting. Someone else said, "Didn't Delilah's ex build Blackwell?" Apparently, the silence was deafening. I didn't hear this firsthand. Sasha did. Her college roommate worked at the bank. And word travels fast when desperation meets irony. That's when the calls started. First, it was a junior executive named Greg. He left 3 voicemails. Polite. Vaguely apologetic. We think there's synergy. Then came an email from their COO, Marianne, who once told me at a gala that I had humble hands and probably wouldn't understand the burden of generational wealth. She asked for a call. I didn't answer. Then Delilah emailed. The subject line was just, Grayson. No pleasantries. Just 5 sentences. We're in a difficult position. I know things ended badly, but this company affects more than just us. It affects employees, families. I wouldn't be reaching out unless it mattered. Please talk to my father. He'll explain everything. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just entitlement disguised as necessity. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. Not because I wasn't interested, because I wanted them to sweat. They weren't used to waiting. They were used to people jumping. I made them sit with the silence for a full week. No reply. No callback. And when Sasha told me Delilah's mother had been spotted in the bank lobby, tears in her eyes, begging to speak with someone who understood legacy, I knew the time had come. I flew into New York. I wore a black suit, no tie. Subtle, sharp. The kind of look that says, I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to be the last person you can afford to ignore. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not to fix anything. Just to look. To see what Delilah would see if she walked through the door now. Gone was the man she left in that beige office. The man who signed his name with shaking hands and walked out with nothing but air in his lungs. This man was different. Solid. Silent. Whole. And I knew, without doubt, that they were going to come crawling. I didn't have to chase. They would come to me. Because when you build your life on cards, all it takes is one gust of wind, one man with a long memory and a stronger hand, to make it all collapse. I knew they would come eventually. Desperation always finds its way to the door of the one person it once tried to bury. But even still, the sight of them, walking into my boardroom like ghosts dressed in designer clothes, struck something cold in my chest. Sasha's voice crackled through the intercom. You've got visitors. They didn't schedule, but I figured you'd want the warning. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Russell Hartwell led the parade. He'd aged in all the wrong ways, sagging skin, neck too red for the chilled air of our Manhattan office, the tie around his thick neck a little too tight. He tried to puff himself up like he was still someone. But the sweat beneath his collar and the trembling hand adjusting his jacket told the truth. Delilah followed a step behind him, clutching a handbag that might have once cost a fortune, now worn at the corners like her composure. She wore a blazer that didn't quite fit, and her heels clicked like they had something to prove. Behind them was her mother, Evelyn, chin tilted upward, lips tight, her expression stuck somewhere between denial and entitlement. Sasha had only given me a moment to prepare, but that was all I needed. I leaned back in my chair, the skyline behind me draped in winter fog. Our office was made of glass and steel cold, clean lines. A perfect backdrop for this funeral. Russell was the first to speak. Grayson. His voice cracked once before he cleared it and tried again, deeper. Thank you for seeing us. I didn't say I would, I replied. But you're here. So, 5 minutes. Starting now. Delilah blinked like she couldn't quite believe it. Maybe she expected me to stand. Maybe she thought I'd melt at the sight of her again, that I'd feel something. I didn't. She looked like a painting left out in the rain, still beautiful to someone. Maybe, but the shape of her was running. Evelyn sat down like she owned the room, crossing her legs with the same elegance she used to dismiss me from holiday dinners. She was wearing the same brand of perfume I remembered from our first meeting, a suffocating blend of roses and vinegar. We're not here to fight, Russell said quickly. We're here to talk. About the company. About options. I folded my hands in front of me. Speak. He swallowed. As you may know, Hartwell Logistics has had some challenges. Market shifts. Supply chain disruption. And frankly, some internal mismanagement. I'll own that. We've hit a liquidity issue, and you're bankrupt, I said. He flinched. Evelyn's nostrils flared. That's not, Delilah started, but I cut her off with a glance. I read the filings. The debt maturity. The delinquent vendor payments. You leveraged too much, expanded too fast, and paid yourself too often. I know the truth. So let's not pretend you came here to explain it. A long silence. Russell nodded slowly. You're right. We need help. No, I said. You need saving. And the bank's already said no. Delilah stepped forward. We have equity assets. If we can bring in the right partner, we can restructure. You know the company's bones are still strong. I laughed. Bones. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. You built your house out of credit and pretension. You thought it would hold because it always had before. But that's not how storms work. They don't care about legacy. They don't care who your grandfather was. They just test every window, every nail, every weak point. And you, Delilah, are nothing if not a weak point. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't speak. Russell tried to salvage it. We're offering a stake, a controlling interest. You come in as CEO, restructure the firm. We stay on in advisory roles. It's mutually beneficial. Stop, I said. You had your 5 minutes. Now let me speak. I stood up, slowly, walked around the table to the side cabinet where I kept a small folder. I'd prepared it the moment Sasha warned me they'd reached out. I set it down on the table and opened it. Recognize this nurse? Delilah paled. It was a photo blurry but clear enough. An older woman in scrubs standing beside a hospital bed. She took care of your grandfather in his final months. Sweet woman. Loyal. Until you threatened her job if she didn't testify against me. Delilah's lips parted. She told me everything, I continued. The lies. The coaching. The phone call you made the night before the hearing, feeding her the script. I have the recording. I have the bank transfers. I have signed affidavits from 3 former employees of your boutique, confirming you used my name to secure loans and then defaulted. Evelyn's voice was sharp. You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything, I said, calm now. You came here, not me. You came because the water's up to your chin, and I'm the only hand left. Russell looked like he'd been punched. You want $15 million, I said, and you have the audacity to ask it from the man you buried in court. You think just because I didn't fight back then, I won't now. Delilah's voice cracked. Grayson, we didn't know. You knew, I said coldly. You knew exactly what you were doing. And now you want my mercy. But I didn't build Blackwell for mercy. I built it for protection. They said nothing. The air was heavy with the realization that the man they thought had disappeared had instead turned himself into something they couldn't manipulate. I watched them squirm in designer silence. Their empire was collapsing. Their name meant nothing in this room. You should leave, I said, finally. Russell stood first. His shoulders sagged. He nodded once, then turned. Evelyn followed stiffly, still trying to maintain her dignity. But Delilah lingered. Just for a second. Do you hate me? She asked quietly. I met her eyes. No, I said. But I remember. She nodded like that was worse. Then she left. and the door shut behind them with the soft, definitive sound of a tomb ceiling. The silence after they left was almost sacred. I stood there, still as the skyline behind me, and let the quiet seep into my bones. That boardroom had seen venture capitalists, generals, tech giants, but never ghosts. And that's what they were now. Delilah, Russell, Evelyn. Hollow names with no more power than the past I'd already buried. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I didn't just want them to fall. I wanted them to know exactly how far they dropped before they hit the ground. I waited 3 days. Then I called Sasha into my office. "Send them a meeting request," I said. She didn't flinch. Sasha never flinched. "Same location?" I nodded. "This time, bring in coffee. Make it look civilized." She smirked, then left. They came back the next morning, like I knew they would. This time, Russell didn't bother with the double-breasted suit. He looked thinner, his eyes sunken in like someone had removed the last ounce of certainty from his bloodstream. Evelyn wore sunglasses, indoors, like they could hide the reality that she'd been crying or maybe just didn't want to be seen clearly. Delilah? She looked worse than before. Her hair was pulled back too tight, like she was trying to control what little remained in her orbit. Her jacket had a missing button near the cuff. Small things. But I noticed. I stood as they walked in, extended my hand. Not out of courtesy. Out of power. The man who stands and offers the handshake is the one who has nothing to lose. Russell hesitated, then took it. His grip was weak. Evelyn just nodded. Delilah tried to smile. We sat. Sasha brought in the coffee. Real porcelain cups. Nothing cheap or disposable. Everything I did was deliberate. Every detail was a message. Delilah started with pleasantries. "Thank you for it." I held up a hand. "Don't." She stopped. I pulled the folder from my drawer again. Only this time, I slid it open wider. More papers. More photos. More proof. "Before we continue," I said, "you should know I didn't just come prepared last time. I came armed." I tapped the top page. "This is a signed affidavit from the nurse. She outlines everything, the threats, the instructions, even the bonus wire she received 3 days after the hearing. Here's the bank statement, showing it came from Evelyn's account, disguised as a consulting fee." Russell closed his eyes. I moved to the next document. 3 of Delilah's former employees submitted sworn statements detailing financial manipulation. She used my name to co-sign 2 loans after our divorce, forged my electronic signature, then ghosted when repayment hit. The banks pursued me. "I had to defend myself while you were posting beach selfies." Delilah's voice was barely audible. "I didn't." "You did." I cut in. "And even if you didn't, you watched it happen. Same difference." I turned to Evelyn. "Remember when you told the judge I was emotionally unstable? That I had outbursts? That I broke things in the house?" She didn't answer. "I have recordings," I said. "You were on speaker. I was sitting in the garage, phone in hand, staring at a dog that would later be taken from me. You didn't know I'd started recording everything by then. I was already building the case. Just in case." Russell looked like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. I let that sit for a moment, then leaned back. "Here's what I've got. Multiple counts of fraud, perjury, and character defamation. Enough to sink your public image, maybe even drag this into federal court. But I'm not here to make threats. I don't need a trial." Delilah's voice trembled. "Then what do you want?" I smiled. "I want the truth to sit with you. I want you to understand the scope of what you did. I want you to remember, in exact detail, how you dismantled a man who loved you, and how he rebuilt himself while you burned everything he gave you." She didn't cry. I expected her to. But no, Delilah didn't cry in public. That was her mother's specialty. Evelyn's hand. I held up one finger. Option 1. I do nothing. You fall. Bankruptcy is filed. Creditors come knocking. Your family name becomes a cautionary tale in business schools. Maybe there's a scandal. Maybe jail time. Maybe just shame. Either way, the legacy ends here. I held up a second finger. Option 2. I bail you out. Not as a partner. Not as a savior. As a buyer. You sign over the company. Every asset. The name. The estate in the Berkshires. Every vehicle. Every commercial property. Every slice of equity. I take it all. In exchange, I cover your debts and walk away. Evelyn gasped. You can't. I can, I said flatly. I already have the legal framework drafted. All I need is your signatures. Delilah stared at me like she'd seen a stranger crawl out of the man she thought she knew. You'd really do that? You did worse, I said. You just wore pearls while doing it. Russell's voice was dry. This isn't business. This is revenge. No, I said, standing. This is balance. I walked toward the window and looked out at the city. It sprawled below me like a living thing, ruthless, hungry, unapologetic. The perfect mirror for what I'd become. You told me I was nothing, I said without turning around. You left me with nothing. Now you want $15 million. So I'll ask one last time, how's that taste? No one answered. I turned back to face them. You have 24 hours. After that, I walk away, and I let the world see what your empire really looks like under sunlight. Delilah opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded. They stood one by one. No more arguments. No more bargaining. They walked out, and I was left alone again, but not empty. Not this time. This time, I held all the receipts. The next morning, the signatures came through. Not with ceremony. Not with a meeting. Just a series of scanned PDFs, dropped neatly into Sasha's inbox at 9:42 a.m., every page initialed, time-stamped, and bloodless. The Hartwell family had folded. No fight. No threats. Just quiet surrender dressed in digital ink. The estate. The company. The properties. Everything they'd once used to build their little fortress of legacy was now mine. Sasha printed the final document and brought it to my desk. She didn't say anything, just placed the folder down and gave me a long, unreadable look. I flipped to the last page. The estate deed was signed by all three, Russell, Evelyn, Delilah. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Still too perfect, too smooth, like it was afraid of honesty. I traced the shape of the D in Delilah. That used to be the first letter of every morning for me, Delilah in the kitchen, pouring coffee, humming some tunes she half remembered from her mother. I used to believe in that version of her. Now all I saw was a signature of desperation. Sasha broke the silence. So, it's done. Not yet, I said. They think it is. But this is just the prelude. I left the office early that day. Drove to the Berkshires estate myself. I wanted to see it again, not because I missed it, but because I needed to stand on that porch and look at what I'd once been denied. The gates opened with a fresh keycard, no resistance. The house was just as I remembered, grand, but hollow. Like someone built it with ego instead of wood. I walked through the foyer slowly, the sound of my steps echoing off marble floors. Dust had started to gather in the corners, and the scent of stale flowers still lingered in the hallway. Evelyn must have ordered weekly arrangements back when they still believed they'd keep it. I stepped into the sunken living room, stood under that ridiculous crystal chandelier, and laughed. They offered me this life once, back when I was still married. Back when Delilah dangled promises of inheritance and family ties like they were rewards for loyalty. But it always came with strings. Appearances to maintain. Versions of myself I had to shrink to fit into their world. They didn't want a partner. They wanted a prop. And I was too naive to understand that props get discarded when the script changes. Now I held the entire stage. I walked the perimeter of the property, boots crunching through the frostbitten grass. I found the bench near the pond where I once sat during a Hartwell Christmas party, feeling like a stranger in a sea of cashmere. Delilah had told me then, they just need time. They'll come around. I believed her. Thought love could translate across class, like it spoke louder than money. That was the last night I believed in her. By the time I got back to the car, the sky had gone soft with dusk. The estate didn't look noble anymore. It looked tired, like it was waiting for someone to put it out of its misery. And I intended to. Back in the city, Sasha had already lined up my legal team. Andre, my attorney, reviewed the documents again with surgical precision. We had no intention of preserving Hartwell Logistics. Its bones were rotten. We'd carve it up piece by piece, sell off the functional divisions, dissolve the bad debt, and bury the name. The estate would be liquidated. Every dollar earned would go into something better. Delilah called that night. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I needed her to hear mine. Grayson, she said. Soft. Cautious. Delilah, I replied. To what do I owe the pleasure? I just wanted to say thank you, she said carefully. For not humiliating us. For offering an out. I let the silence breathe. She wasn't calling out of gratitude. She was testing the ice. Seeing how thin it was. Seeing if I might still fall through. You know what the difference is between you and me? I said finally. She didn't answer. You take what doesn't belong to you and call it survival. I give people choices, and they call it cruelty. But I didn't force you to sign. I just reminded you how cold the world gets when the fire you started starts burning your own feet. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Not like this. Like what? I asked. Holding you accountable? Turning your lies into leverage? You handed me the blade, Delilah. I just decided not to fall on it. She was silent again. Then, softer, I never wanted it to go this far. I actually smiled. You're not scared of the fall. You're scared that someone watched you climb and now owns the ladder. You're not the same man I married, she whispered. No, I said. I'm not. You killed him. But I buried him. And the man who rose afterward doesn't take breadcrumbs and call it dinner. She started to speak again, but I ended the call. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't even vindication. It was stillness. The kind that comes when the storm has finally stopped and you're standing in the wreckage, realizing you're still alive. I poured myself a drink, sat on the balcony of my penthouse apartment, one paid for in full, no loans, no co-signers, and looked out over the city. It glittered like possibility, not because of what I'd taken back, but because of what I'd learned in the taking. Fear eats pride. That's what I'd said in the boardroom. And I meant it. They had pride, but I had memory. They had connections, but I had receipts. They had offers. But now, I made the terms, and they signed. The day the wire hit, I sat at my desk staring at a number I couldn't have imagined 5 years earlier. 9 figures. Real. Confirmed. Liquid. Every last cent transferred from the asset liquidation of Hartwell Logistics, the sale of their estate, their fleet, their remaining stock, and even Evelyn's beloved antique car collection. All of it gutted and converted to clean cash. Not one trophy left for them to cling to. The empire they built with arrogance and inherited vanity was now mine, and I'd already taken the wrecking ball to it. Andre handled the legal carnage like a surgeon. Sasha coordinated the sale process, making sure every press release was laced with language like restructuring, legacy division, and strategic exit, all while quietly dismantling everything from within. The headlines tried to make sense of it. Cybersecurity CEO acquires struggling logistics giant in surprise buyout. They speculated about a merger, a tech pivot, a visionary overhaul. But there was no pivot, no vision. There was only retribution, clean, silent, and surgical. And once it was over, once the money had settled and the legal filings were finalized, I did something none of them expected. I gave it all away. Not in some grand, headline-chasing act of charity. No ribbon cutting, no photo ops, no interviews with legacy magazines. I didn't need applause. I needed meaning. I donated the entire net profit from the dismantled Hartwell fortune to a foundation I quietly created months earlier, Second Ledger. It was designed to support victims of financial abuse. People who'd been stripped of resources, frozen out of accounts, left in the cold by legal systems rigged against them. We funded emergency grants, legal defense services, and shelters, actual physical places where someone could go when they had nowhere left to sleep but the backseat of a sedan. Places for people like the man I used to be. Alone. Ashamed. Broken in ways no spreadsheet could measure. The first shelter we opened was in Chicago. It bore the name the Evelyn House, not out of admiration, but as poetry. Let her name finally house someone for once in her life. A woman in her 60s named Carla was the first resident. She'd left her husband after 30 years of manipulation and theft disguised as marriage. We gave her a safe place to land. A job. A future. Then came the Delilah Fund, specifically for education and digital upskilling. That one made Sasha laugh when I told her the name. Really? She'd asked, arching a brow. You're going to name your redemption arc after her? No, I said. I'm naming it after the version of me that thought she loved me. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped hating Delilah. Hatred takes energy. And I needed mine for something better. Not revenge-proof. I bought back Max. Not literally. He was gone. Too many years had passed. I'd searched, quietly, using contacts, friends in vet networks, even animal shelters. Nothing. It crushed me in a way nothing else could. But I commissioned a bronze statue of him, life-sized, tail midwag, and placed it at the entrance of the Delilah Fund's main building. A reminder. Of love. Of loss. Of loyalty undeserved. I never told anyone about the moment I stood there after it was installed, hand resting on the cold curve of his ears, whispering, I'm sorry, buddy. That moment was mine. The press didn't get wind of anything until the third shelter opened in Atlanta. That one bore my name, or at least the initials, GC House. A journalist connected the dots, tracked the funding back to my holding company, and ran the story. Grayson Camden's Silent Justice. Billionaire CEO funds network for financial abuse victims. Suddenly, everyone had questions. Editorials, panel discussions, debates on intent. Was it altruism or vengeance? A redemption arc or a PR strategy? I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I wasn't angry anymore. I was clean. I'd taken everything they used to mock me. My silence, my softness, my loyalty, and I turned it into the sharpest blade in the room. Not to draw blood, but to cut myself free from the weight of ever needing their approval again. The people who once laughed at me now studied me in boardrooms. The same judges who overlooked me read my filings and whispered behind closed doors. The woman who thought I would crawl back now lived in a rented townhouse with her name removed from every deed that ever mattered. And me? I slept. God, I finally slept. No nightmares. No phantom courtrooms. No lingering shame. Just rest. The kind that fills your lungs and makes you remember what it means to breathe without waiting for the next punch. Some nights, I walked through the city anonymously. Hoodie up. Hands in pockets. Watching lives play out behind restaurant windows and subway cars. Nobody knew me on those nights. And that was the point. I didn't want to be known. I wanted to be grounded. To remember what it felt like to exist without being hunted or haunted. I passed a man once, curled up near a subway grate, guarding a plastic bag like it held gold. I stopped, took off my coat, draped it over him without a word. He didn't wake. But when he did, he'd be warmer. That was enough. Andre once asked me if I ever planned to rebuild something for myself. A new company. A new empire. I told him no. I didn't want to build again. I wanted to clear the field. So no one else had to start from rubble. That was my legacy. Not what I took, but what I refused to keep. The photo sat in an old shoebox I hadn't touched in years, buried under receipts, business cards, and an unopened envelope addressed to my younger self. One Delilah had once slipped into my laptop bag with the words, "Open when you doubt us," written in blue ink. I never did. Not when she said it. Not after she left. And certainly not now. I found the box during a quiet night, the kind where silence doesn't scream anymore but whispers in softer tones. I'd had a glass of whiskey, neat. No music. No city sounds bleeding in from the penthouse balcony. Just me, the burn of 12-year single malt, and the instinct to go looking not for pain, but for the proof that it had ever been real. The photo was still glossy. Me and Delilah, arms looped around each other, both smiling like we had just won something instead of barely begun. It had been taken at our engagement dinner, right before her father's toast. I remembered the way she leaned in to whisper, "Don't let their silence fool you. We belong here." I believed her. That night, I believed everything. Now, I looked at that image and saw ghosts. The boy I was, bright-eyed and eager to be loved. The girl she pretended to be long enough to hook a future to her name. In between us, something that looked like happiness, captured, framed, and false. I held the photo over the sink, just for a second. Then I walked out to the balcony. The city below pulsed with quiet light. There was a steady hum that never quite silenced itself, horns, air units, footsteps, conversations between people who still had lives to mess up or fix. I watched them all from 36 stories above, the skyline folding into the horizon like a living mosaic. And then, without drama, without hesitation, I burned it. The photo curled slowly at first. Her smile warped. My eyes blackened. The edges turned to ash and scattered into the night air like dust from an old tomb. I let it go, just as I had let go of the life it once promised. I didn't need it anymore. I'd built something better than revenge. I'd built proof. Proof that survival isn't a passive act. It's not just what's left after the storm clears. It's the decision to rebuild in full view of the people who thought you couldn't. The ones who took from you thinking you'd stay buried. The ones who counted on your silence to protect their image. They left me for dead. I didn't just get back up. I walked into rooms they never thought I'd enter again. I bought the floor under their feet and watched them beg for ground. And I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. All I had to do was offer them what they gave me. A signature. And silence. The irony was never lost on me. They taught me this. Delilah with her poised cruelty, Russell with his conditional respect, Evelyn with her passive-aggressive smiles. Even Marco with his spineless betrayal dressed in friendship. They carved out the rules. They shaped the battlefield. I just learned how to fight on it better than they ever imagined. But the win wasn't the money. It wasn't the headlines. It wasn't even the empire I could have built from the ashes. It was the peace. It was the ability to sit alone in my home, drink in hand, and know that no one held a leash around my neck anymore. That every dollar in my account, every brick in the shelters I funded, every encrypted protocol in Blackwell's architecture was mine. Not gifted, not granted, earned, through pain, through discipline, through decisions made in the dark that finally saw the light. Sometimes Sasha asked me if I'd ever marry again. She didn't ask it like a friend, more like an analyst reading a trend. I always told her no. Not because I don't believe in love, but because I believe in cost. And I paid mine already. I don't need another contract to prove I'm capable of commitment. Look at what I've built. Look at what I've carried. Look at what I let go. My legacy isn't a name etched into glass or a title on a door. It's in the systems I left behind for others to use. The foundations. The digital safe houses. The survivors who didn't have to choose between pride and shelter because I'd already cleared that path for them. That's what I built. People think revenge is about destruction. It's not. It's about construction of something stronger than what broke you. That night, after the last cinder from the photo blew into the wind, I walked back inside. The lights were dim, the air still. I poured a second glass and sat at the piano in the corner of the room. I hadn't played it in years. Delilah used to say I only played when I was soft. She said it like it was an insult. But that's the thing about being soft. It's what teaches you how to rebuild. It's what lets you feel the damage as it happens, so you know exactly how to recover. I pressed a key, then another. The melody came back to me slowly, like a friend returning without apology. I didn't need applause. I didn't need an audience. I had silence again. And this time, it was mine.